Imagine you are an absolute monarch.
Right. Okay.
And you control the largest, most ruthless, rapidly expanding empire in the ancient world.
Mm-hmm.
And your current goal is that you want to utterly obliterate your neighbor.
As monarchs do.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So you've got the infantry, you have the chariots, you even have the war elephants.
Oh, wow. The whole setup.
The whole setup. But you want to guarantee, you want to know you're going to win. So you send your chief strategist to the wisest oracle on Earth, basically, to get the tactical odds of your invasion.
Makes sense. You want the intel.
Yeah, but instead of giving you troop movements or, weather patterns or supply line logistics, the oracle asks a single, seemingly bizarre question.
Which is?
He asks, do your enemies have a habit of arguing with each other in their parliament?
Wow. I mean, it is the ultimate subversion of what we think of when we discuss military intelligence, right?
Yeah.
Because we are so conditioned to think of national defense purely in terms of, like, kinetic energy. Walls, weapons, geography.
Spears and shields.
Exactly. But this flips the entire board.
It really does. So, welcome to another deep dive. Today, we are taking you into an ancient text to uncover a remarkably sophisticated framework for survival.
Yeah, it's a fascinating one.
We are unpacking the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, and just for context, this is often translated as the Book of the Great Decease.
Right.
Now, typically this text is studied for its religious significance, right? It's the historical and spiritual account of the Buddha's final year of life before his passing into parinibbana.
Which, for those who might not know, is the complete cessation of the cycle of rebirth.
Right. But our mission today is not a theological one, not at all.
No, far from it. We are dissecting a highly specific, profoundly analytical, socio-political masterclass that's just, hidden right in the opening chapters of this sacred text.
Yeah.
We're drawing on rigorous translations and extensive historical commentaries to explore what is known as the 7 factors of non-decline.
Which is just a great name, because over 2,500 years ago, the Buddha laid out a literal blueprint for how a nation can become entirely unconquerable by outside forces.
Yeah, and not with thicker walls or better metallurgy.
Right. But through the behavioral psychology of its citizens, and the structural integrity of its civic habits.
That's incredible.
It is. We are going to explore how this ancient checklist compares directly to the struggles of modern governance. We're looking at adversarial politics, the decay of institutions, and just the absolute fragility of a republic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's unpack this by setting the historical stage.
Let's do it.
So we are in Iron Age India. This is roughly the 5th or 4th century BCE. And the geopolitical tension is just at a boiling point.
Yeah, we are looking at a period of massive transition. I mean, the Indian subcontinent at this time was this complex patchwork of different forms of government.
Right.
On one side, you have the rising power of centralized imperial monarchies. And the heavyweight here is the Kingdom of Magadha, ruled by King Ajatasattu.
Magadha is the one with the elephants.
Exactly. Magadha is expanding, it's incredibly wealthy, and it is aggressively hungry for territory.
Yeah.
But then, on the other side, right on their border, you have the Vajji Confederacy.
Wait, let's clarify what a confederacy meant in this specific context, because they weren't a monarchy, right?
Correct. Yeah. The Vajji were a republic.
Okay.
They were an alliance of several different clans who governed collectively. They used a council of representatives.
So no king.
No, they didn't have a single supreme king dictating policy from a throne. They had a system of public assemblies, debates, and shared leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And they were prosperous, culturally rich, and incredibly formidable.
Which brings us to the inciting incident. King Ajatasattu of Magadha looks across the border at the Vajji and just decides he wants them gone.
Yeah, he's done with them.
And the text is actually brutal about his intentions. He doesn't just want a border skirmish or like a new treaty.
No.
He literally says, I shall make them perish. I shall utterly destroy them.
Total annihilation.
Total. But despite his massive army, he hesitates. He knows the Vajjis are really powerful. He needs a foolproof prediction before he commits his forces. So he sends his chief minister, a Brahmin named Vasakara.
Right, a Brahmin being a member of the high priestly and scholarly caste. So someone highly skilled in statecraft and diplomacy.
He's the guy you send.
He is. And Vasakara travels to a place called Vulture's Peak to consult the Buddha. Now, you might ask, why consult a spiritual teacher about a military campaign?
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive.
It does. But it's because Ajatasattu knows the Buddha is the Tathagata.
Which literally means the one who has thus gone, right?
Right.
Referring to someone who has achieved perfect enlightenment.
Exactly. And a core attribute of the Tathagata is that he perceives absolute reality. He
Yep.
literally cannot speak falsely.
Oh, wow.
So for a king calculating the odds of a war, the word of the Tathagata isn't just good advice, it is an infallible geopolitical calculation.
It's the ultimate cheat code.
It really is.
Yeah.
So Vasikara arrives, he pays his respects, delivers the king's threat of total annihilation against the Vaji, and basically just waits for the military assessment.
Right. And here is where the Buddha executes an absolutely brilliant rhetorical maneuver.
He does.
He doesn't look at Vasikar and say, yes, your cavalry will crush them, or no, their archers are going to repel you. In fact, he refuses to engage with the minister's premise entirely. He physically turns his back to the minister.
Wow.
Yeah, and he speaks instead to his own attendant, the Venerable Ananda.
What's fascinating here is that he shifts the entire frame of the conversation.
Yeah.
As a spiritual leader, he is sidestepping the trap of endorsing a war or, providing tactical battlefield advice.
Right, he's not taking a side.
Exactly. But on a deeper level,
Yeah.
he is forcibly dragging the conversation away from the metrics of military might, swords and shields, and focusing it entirely on the metrics of internal societal health.
Oh, that's so smart.
He begins asking Ananda a series of questions about the internal habits of the Vaji people.
And by doing this with the Magadhan minister standing right there, the Buddha is basically broadcasting a live diagnostic test of the enemy's republic.
Yes.
He's demonstrating that a republic's defense doesn't live in its standing army. It lives in its civic virtues. If those virtues are intact, the republic is mathematically unconquerable.
Unconquerable.
And he lays this out through 7 specific questions, which form the bedrock of this defensive strategy. So let's dig into the first 2.
Let's do it. So the Buddha turns to Ananda and asks, have you heard, Ananda, that the Vaji hold full and frequent public assemblies?
Okay.
And Ananda replies, I have heard, Lord, that this is so.
Right.
The Buddha then declares, so long, Ananda, as this is the case, the growth of the Vaji is to be expected, not their decline.
Okay, so if I'm listening to this right now, I might be thinking, okay, they hold town hall meetings, big deal. How does showing up to a meeting stop a cavalry charge?
Right, it sounds a bit weak at first.
Yeah, but we need to look at the logistics of an ancient assembly. This wasn't just, a handful of politicians in a closed, air-conditioned room.
No, absolutely not. This required massive physical and logistical buy-in. I mean, an ancient assembly meant clan leaders and regular citizens traveling from across the territory.
Right, dropping everything.
Exactly, dropping their personal affairs, their agriculture, their trade, just to physically gather in a central hall.
That's a huge commitment.
It is. To hold full and frequent assemblies requires a society that possesses a highly disciplined communication network, for one. It requires shared infrastructure to travel safely, and most importantly, it requires a population that actually cares enough about the collective state to show up.
Right. Go.
It demonstrates that the citizens view the state's survival as inseparable from their own personal survival.
It's like proof of life for the democracy.
Exactly.
But showing up is only half the equation, which leads directly to the second factor. Because if you just put a bunch of rival clan leaders in a room, you could easily just end up with a brawl.
Which happens.
Right. So the Buddha asks, do they assemble in Concord and rise in Concord and carry out their undertakings in Concord? And again, as long as they do, they will not decline.
Concord is the operative mechanism here.
Concord.
Yeah. It means harmony or agreement. Now, we must be careful not to misinterpret this.
How so?
Well, concord doesn't mean a lack of debate. You don't have full and frequent assemblies if everyone already agrees on everything.
Right.
You just send a memo.
True. Yeah.
Concord is about the manner in which they disagree
Yeah.
and how they resolve that disagreement.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, let's apply this structurally to modern governance.
Okay.
Our sources, specifically the historical commentaries on this text, they make a direct leap to the present day.
Right.
They point out that these exact same 7 factors protect modern governments too, but they specifically highlight the vulnerability of adversarial parliaments. They note instances, in extreme cases where actual physical fights break out over controversial debates, or where the system just grinds to a complete halt because factions refuse to compromise.
And the commentary plainly states that this behavior does not augur well for the prosperity of any nation.
No.
Mathematically, an adversarial system incentivizes friction. It rewards politicians who prioritize a viral takedown of their opponent over the tedious work of legislative compromise.
We see that all the time.
We do. And the Buddha is highlighting a fatal structural flaw here. If a society's leaders meet in hatred, debate in bad faith, and rise in bitter division, the gates of the nation are effectively wide open to an invader.
Because the invader doesn't even need to break down the door.
Nope.
They just need to wait for the people inside to burn the house down themselves.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean for us? The metric of a healthy democracy isn't the absence of conflict. It's the shared commitment to the institution itself. In a healthy system, the goal of the debate is finding the best path forward for the collective. But in a toxic, discordant system, the goal becomes the absolute destruction of the political opponent.
Even if it means sinking the ship of state to do it.
Exactly. Sinking the ship just to drown the guy you don't like.
The Vaji were strong because their primary allegiance was to the Republic, not to their individual clans' dominance. They recognized that if the Republic fell, the clans fell. The moment the primary goal of leadership shifts from, governing well to defeating the other side at all costs, Concord just evaporates.
Okay, so if a society can actually achieve that baseline, they show up and they work together in Concord, how do they protect that fragile ecosystem over time?
That's the challenge.
Right. How do you prevent a new generation from just walking in and blowing up the consensus? And the text addresses this directly with factors 3 and 4. This is where the philosophy introduces a massive stabilizing anchor.
Yeah, so the third factor the Buddha outlines is this. He says, they enact nothing not already established, abrogate nothing that has been already enacted, and act in accordance with the ancient institutions of the Vaji as established in former days.
Wow.
And the commentaries explicitly label this as a profoundly conservative instruction.
Okay, I have to admit, when I first read enact nothing new, abrogate nothing old, I felt a lot of friction.
It's a tough pill to swallow for modern ears.
It is. Let's tie that logic.
Yeah.
Because, wait, isn't progress built on changing old laws?
Yeah.
I mean, if a society never abrogated old rules, they would be trapped in the past. They could never adapt to new technologies or economic shifts or evolving moral standards. Is the Buddha just telling them to be entirely rigid? Is this a mandate for absolute paralyzing rigidity?
It's the natural objection, but the
Yeah.
commentary actually complicates that simplistic reading. We have to view this through the lens of institutional vulnerability.
Okay, explain that.
The danger the Buddha is mitigating here is legal whiplash. Think about the concept of Chesterton's fence.
Oh, right. The principle that you should never tear down a fence until you understand why it was built in the first place.
Exactly. The people who built the fence weren't stupid. They had a reason.
Right.
So if you just tear it down because you don't see the use for it right now, you might let the wolves in.
It's like trying to play a game of chess where the rules of how the knight moves change every 3 turns.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Eventually, the players realize the rules don't matter, they stop trying to win the game legitimately, and they just start flipping the board.
Exactly the right analogy. If every time a new political faction gains a slim majority, they immediately tear up the Constitution, rewrite the tax codes, and overhaul the judicial system to suit their immediate short-term whims, the law loses all authority.
Yeah.
If the law is transient, it is weak.
Because public trust just evaporates. You can't build a business or raise a family or plan a society if you don't know what the laws will be in 5 years.
Right. So by advising the Vaji to adhere to their ancient institutions, the Buddha is demanding structural stability. He's not saying never adapt.
Okay.
He is saying that changes to the fundamental operating system of the society must be incredibly deliberate. They have to require overwhelming consensus, and they must respect the foundational principles that built the society to begin with. It prevents a vocal minority or even a temporary aggressive majority from destabilizing the entire republic.
And that relies heavily on who is actually guarding that operating system.
It does.
Which brings us to the human element of this anchor. Factor 4. The Buddha asks Ananda, do the Vaji honor, esteem, revere, and support the Vaji elders, and hold it a point of duty to hearken to their words?
Yeah, and remember, in an oral culture, an elders isn't just someone who has lived a long time.
Right.
They are the living archive of the state. They are the society's hard drive.
I love that. The hard drive.
They hold the institutional memory of how crises were handled 3 decades ago.
So if a new, inexperienced leader faces an economic shock or like a border dispute, their instinct might be to panic, violate Factor 3, and radically rewrite the laws to force a quick fix.
Exactly. But the elder can step in and provide the vital context. They can say, look, we faced this exact pressure 20 years ago. Here is how our institutions are designed to absorb this shock without breaking. When a society discards its elders, When it mocks lived experience and institutional memory in favor of reactionary populist impulses, it wipes its own hard drive.
Oh.
It flies blind into every storm.
That is such a powerful image. Okay, so we've established a society that meets frequently, works in Concord, maintains stable laws, and respects its historical memory.
Sounds pretty solid.
It sounds like a highly functioning government.
Right.
But how do you prove that government is actually just?
Right.
Because a tyrannical government can have stable laws and respect its elders, but still be a complete nightmare to live in.
Oh, absolutely.
And this leads to factor 5. And I have to say, I found this to be the most radically unexpected part of a military defense strategy I have ever seen.
It really is. The Buddha asks, do the Vajji refrain from abducting women and maidens of good families and from detaining them?
Okay.
And the commentary translates this essentially as, no women or girls belonging to their clans are detained among them by force or abduction.
The protection of women and girls from abduction.
Mm-hmm.
Put yourself in the sandals of the Magadhan minister listening to this. You're trying to figure out how to besiege a territory, and the oracle tells you that their greatest defense is domestic human rights.
It sounds totally disconnected.
Right. How does the safety of women walking down the street correlate to repelling an invading empire?
Well, this raises an important question regarding how a society protects its vulnerable demographics. We have to look at the psychological and structural realities of the ancient world.
Okay.
The abduction of women was often a literal tactic of war. It was a spoil of conquest.
Yeah, sadly.
But internally, if abductions are happening within your own borders, it is a symptom of a completely lawless, chaotic society. It means private power has superseded public law.
The protection of the vulnerable isn't just a moral gold star on the government's report card.
No?
It is a structural, load-bearing wall for the entire society.
It is the absolute litmus test for the state's monopoly on violence. If local warlords or gangs or powerful clans are kidnapping women with impunity, it proves the state's laws are impotent.
Right. The government has failed its most basic social contract, which is protecting the physical bodies of its citizens.
Exactly.
And if a state has lost the ability to enforce order and protect its citizens internally, it has zero capacity to project force externally to repel an invader.
None.
I mean, if I am a citizen and the government cannot protect my daughter from being abducted by a rival clan, why on earth would I pick up a spear and risk my life to defend that government from an outside king?
You wouldn't.
I wouldn't. The state is already dead to me.
Precisely the point. You cannot have the conquered of factor 2 if half the population lives in terror.
Right.
The society is divided into predators and prey at that point. A nation is fundamentally unsafe from outside threats if its own citizens are not safe from internal violence. The Buddha is basically stating that true national defense requires making the society actually worth defending.
Wow. Making a society worth defending.
Yeah.
That concept, it moves beyond physical safety and laws. It moves into the psychology of the population, which brings us to the final 2 factors.
Right.
Factor 6 states that the Vajji must honor, esteem, revere, and support the shrines in town and country, and not allow the proper offerings and rites to fall into desuetude. And Factor 7 states they must protect and guard the arahants, the fully awakened holy people, so that those who are already there can live in peace and more might come.
So if the first 5 factors establish the civic mechanics and the rule of law, these final 2 establish the soul and the cultural integrity of the nation.
And here's where it gets really interesting. It's vital to note what the Buddha does not say here.
What's that?
He does not say, you must only support Buddhist temples and Buddhist monks. He is speaking to a republic with diverse clans and traditions, and he tells them to protect the shrines and holy people of the land broadly. He is not advocating for a theocracy.
No, he's advocating for the preservation of the sacred.
Yeah.
To strip away the religious terminology and apply it structurally. A thriving society must dedicate physical and cultural space to higher truths. It must protect its philosophers, its thinkers, its spiritual leaders, and its historical heritage.
Okay, let's voice the skepticism again.
Bring it on.
How does protecting a philosopher or maintaining a shrine stop a volley of flaming arrows?
By preventing the most dangerous internal rot a society can face.
Which is?
Profound cynicism. Yeah. When a nation mocks its own highest ideals, when it allows its historical spaces of reverence to be bulldozed or neglected, and when it actively attacks the people who dedicate their lives to seeking truth, it severs its connection to anything larger than immediate material gain.
It becomes a purely transactional society.
Exactly.
And here is the mechanical danger of a transactional society. If your citizens only care about their immediate wealth and comfort, they will not fight an invading army.
Why would they?
Because fighting is uncomfortable and gets you killed. A transactional citizen will just wait for the invading king to offer them a tax break or a bribe, and they will open the gates themselves.
Yes, but a society that honors the sacred, that believes it is a custodian of a culture, a philosophy, and a history that transcends any single individual's life,
Yeah.
that society has something worth dying for. Factors 6 and 7 ensure the population remains psychologically mobilized. It gives them the profound moral resilience needed to endure the horrors of a siege.
So let's look at the totality of this diagnostic test. The Buddha finishes speaking to Ananda. He has just outlined a society that meets frequently, works together in good faith, respects its foundational laws, values the wisdom of its elders, rigorously protects its most vulnerable citizens, and reveres its highest cultural and spiritual ideals.
It's a masterpiece of civic design.
It is. And all while Vasikara, the spy for the invading king, is standing right there taking notes.
And Vasikara's reaction is the chilling climax of this encounter.
Yeah.
He is a brilliant, cold-blooded statesman. He listens to this list, and his geopolitical calculus immediately shifts.
He sees the wall.
He turns to the Buddha and says, "We may expect, then, the welfare and not the decline of the Vajji when they are possessed of any one of these conditions. How much more so when they are possessed of all the 7?
He runs the numbers. He realizes the Magadhan army, despite its size, cannot breach this civic armor.
He openly admits defeat on the battlefield. He says the Vajji cannot be overcome by the king of Magadha. That is, not in battle. But he does not stop there. He immediately identifies the one and only loophole. He finishes his sentence. Without diplomacy or breaking up their alliance.
Oh, wow. And this is where the narrative shifts from a brilliant philosophical framework into an absolute historical tragedy.
It really is tragic.
Because the Buddha gave them the perfect shield, but the enemy realized the only way to defeat the shield was to convince the people holding it to drop it.
Yes.
Vasikara realizes that you cannot murder a republic from the outside. You can only induce it to commit suicide.
The historical commentaries detail exactly how Vasikara weaponized this loophole, and it is a masterclass in psychological warfare.
What does he do?
Well, Vasikara returns to King Ajatasattu. They call off the military invasion.
For now.
For now, instead, they fake a massive political fallout. Ajatasattu publicly accuses Vasikara of treason, physically punishes him, and exiles him from Magadha.
It's a complete Trojan horse operation.
Exactly. Vasikara, battered and seemingly disgraced, flees across the border to the Vajji. And the Vajji, seeing the chief strategist of their greatest enemy seeking asylum, take him in.
Oh, no.
Yeah. They give him a position of trust, eventually allowing him to tutor the young princes of the Vajji clans.
And once he is inside the walls, he doesn't assassinate anyone. He doesn't burn down the armory.
He doesn't need to.
He simply goes to work on Factor 2.
Yeah.
Conquered.
He spends 3 solid years systematically dismantling their unity through manufactured paranoia.
3 years.
The commentary explains his method. He would take one prince aside and whisper something completely innocuous like, "Did you see what that other prince was wearing?"
Just planting a seed.
Right. Then he would go to the second prince and say, "Did you see how he was whispering about you? He thinks your clan is weak. He thinks your agricultural yields are pathetic."
He weaponized their pride.
Completely.
He didn't invent grand conspiracies. He just introduced a constant low-level friction of distrust. And over 3 years, that friction eroded the foundations of the Republic.
The clan leaders stopped talking to each other directly. They assumed bad faith in every interaction.
And the tragedy reaches its peak when the crisis finally comes. After 3 years of this psychological rot, Vasikara sends a secret message back to King Ajatasattu.
The time is now.
Exactly. The Magadhan army marches on the Vajji border. The alarms are sounded in the Republic. The ancient assembly bells are rung, calling the leaders to gather and coordinate their defense.
The very mechanism of Factor 1.
Yes. The assemblies.
And what happens?
Nobody comes.
Wow.
The commentary records the responses of the Vajji leaders when the bells rang. They said, "Let the strong ones go. Let the brave ones go."
They just didn't care anymore.
They had become so cynical, so deeply distrustful of their own countrymen, that they refused to stand shoulder to shoulder in the assembly hall. The conquered was completely broken.
Factor 2 was gone.
Gone. And because they would not assemble, the Magadhan army swept in, breached the gates without a prolonged siege, and utterly annihilated the Vajji Confederacy. The ultimate failure of the state. They possessed the strongest defensive blueprint in the ancient world, and they traded it away for petty grievances and internal factionalism.
It proves a recurring thesis in Buddhist political thought. Later, this very same text, the Buddha visits a place where Magadhan ministers are building a massive fortress,
Okay.
which he prophesies will become the great city of Pataliputra.
Yeah.
But he makes a very specific prediction about its ultimate vulnerability. He says the city will only ever face three perils: fire, flood, and internal dissension.
Not invasion.
No. The greatest existential threat to a prosperous, free society is never the enemy at the gates. The true threat is the breakdown of these seven factors from within.
If you are listening to this right now, I want you to pull this ancient history into your immediate reality. Think about your own modern organizations.
Mhm.
Look at your workplace, your local school board, your municipal government, or even the macro level of national politics. When these systems fail, why do they fail?
Right. Are they collapsing because of some insurmountable, overpowering external force?
Or are they crumbling because the people inside them have stopped meeting in Concord? Because they've started viewing their fellow citizens not as partners in a shared survival, but as enemies to be destroyed.
Exactly, because they've stopped respecting the institutional wisdom that built their society, allowed paranoia to replace trust, and forgotten that the safety of the vulnerable is the only real metric of a functioning system.
It forces a brutal self-audit.
It really does. In our daily civic interactions, are we acting as the builders of our republic, maintaining the concord and the structural integrity of the state? Or are we unwittingly acting as Vasikara's agents, eagerly tearing down our own defenses by indulging in endless manufactured discord?
We have covered an immense expanse of historical and philosophical ground today. We started with an emperor's ambition for total war.
Yeah.
We watched an enlightened teacher pivot away from military logistics to outline a flawless 7-point diagnostic for societal resilience.
A system relying on active participation, unified purpose, legal stability, respect for wisdom, absolute defense of human rights, and the preservation of a culture's soul.
And finally, we witnessed the devastating reality that even the most perfect defensive shield can be shattered if the people holding it can be manipulated into turning on one another.
It's a heavy lesson.
It is.
Mm.
The text leaves us with a haunting realization. The Buddha gave the Vajji the exact blueprint to survive indefinitely, but the Magadhan strategist immediately recognized that the cheapest, most efficient way to conquer a strong nation was simply to introduce a virus of distrust.
Yeah.
So I want to leave you with this final lingering thought to explore on your own. If an ancient, ruthless empire knew 2,500 years ago that the easiest way to destroy a formidable democracy was simply to make its citizens hate each other,
Hmm.
how many of the bitter, hyper-partisan political arguments we engage in today are actually just someone else's strategy to weaken us?
Wow. That's something to think about.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Stay curious, keep looking for the mechanisms behind the history, and we'll see you next time.